Most venerables, distinguished guests, sisters and brothers in the Dharma. First, my apologies for not able to attend the conference with you all in very sacred Borobudur. Unfortunately, yesterday, when I checked in at the airport, the staff informed me that my passport validation was not enough to fly to Indonesia. As a result, I missed my flight to be with you all. Secondly, I am very grateful for the honor that the Indonesian Buddhist College Association have done me by inviting me to present a keynote speech on a very important topic of encountering the sacred, Borobudur as a site of heritage, pilgrimage, and tourism for Buddhists in the world. Encountering the sacred is a popular phrase widely used in atheistic religions, where unseen divine power might play a great role in a person's life. However, when we use it in a general sense, I would use sacred more towards spiritual transformation rather than something to do with a deity, a divine power. When we take sacred in a more secular sense, we can imagine that many things in our life are sacred. Each sacred moment or place would be kept secured in one's memory, and many times that sacredness has a great impact upon our understanding of life. Therefore, encouraging the sacred is something which can be a great source of spiritual transformation with each and individual. My encountering the sacred was at my very young childhood, when I follow my beloved father to the temple every morning, where my father used to go and play harmonium, sing a Buddhist hymn in order to warm up the Buddhist community. I used to sit side by side of my father and used to sing those Buddhist hymns in chorus with my father. Of course, I was just 12, 13 years old boy at the time. But each phrase, each word I sang without true understanding was a true encountering the sacred for me, because all social ethics, moralities, the Buddha, the Buddhism was slowly become encountering the sacred for my life. That's how I become who I am these days. Because of that sacredness which I encounter at the early age without even true understanding what was I doing at the time. So this is a true sacred in general people's life. And I'm sure that every one of us has this small story here and there to refer to the idea that we have encountered the sacred in our life once and for a while. Therefore, encountering the sacred from a Buddhist perspective doesn't mean that it has to do anything with the divine. It has to do anything with the God or gods. But it is something which we inspire by teaching. It is something which we understand the Dharma and has a great impact upon the way we think, the way we live, the way we act, the way we speak. This is what we call in Buddhist idea as a sacred. It is not a sacred in a sense that it's an abstract form to do with something unseen, to do with something, the power, what we call divine, or gods, or deity. But from Buddhist point of view, we make things sacred by our intention and attention and our action. For example, when you see something let's say that a Buddhist monument, a Buddhist relief like in Borobudur, the story of the Buddha, the explanation of the voyage, the teachings which replicated in a relief form, the carved stone form. If you look at each relief, which in Borobudur there are over 1,406 reliefs of those stories. There are, in other way, is animated stories of the Buddha and the Buddha Dharma. When you study, when you look at it through your great contemplation, there you will find the encountering the sacred. Because those stories are not belong to the Buddha alone, but those stories is manifestation of every human story. In other words, if you study the Buddha story from each relief, I'm sure that out of 1,460 Buddhist stories, there might be 1 or 2 or 3 or more than 10 stories which resemble your own life. And that is where I will call that encountering the sacred. Because when you read, when you look at this relief, and you will find out, wow, this is me. This is what happened to my life. And for many, it inspires, this is how I should live. This is how I should lead my life. So this is what I call encountering the sacred. However, when we talk about the sacred in Buddhism, I guess it is totally different from the Western idea of the sacred. Because, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have the idea of a sacred in a sense of divine power. Therefore, in Sanskrit or in Pali, the original Buddhist language, we didn't have the idea of sacred, or we didn't have the word called sacred as per se. If you look at any dictionary, we will find the word sacred, which is given in a Pali or Sanskrit word, for example, like punya, mahaniya, pujaniya, or parisuddhi. These are the words we used to translate, or we used to try to put parallel to what we call sacred in English. But if we look at from the Buddhist understanding, it is something what we do as a punya is actions. It's a cleansing of your mind. That is called sacred in Buddhism. Mahaniya means that it's a praiseworthy, which means that everyone praise about your action, the way you speak, the way you think. That is what we call sacred in Buddhist meaning. Pujaniya, someone who is entitled to be homage, or even parisuddhi, parisuddha, which means that a purity. So these are the synonyms in Pali and Sanskrit which relevant, which is the sacred in English word. Therefore, if you look at the word itself, the sacred from Buddhist point of view is totally different from the sacred in theistic religion, or especially in Western approach. Therefore, when we say that encountering the sacred from Buddhist point of view, it is something about whatever you see, whatever you face, whatever you encounter, but it has a great impact upon the way you think, the way you speak, the way you think, and the way you act. These are what we call encountering the sacred in Buddhism. Therefore, the word sacred in Buddhist idea has a total different meaning. Similarly, in a Chinese and Japanese derivations and their cultures, which is again influenced by Buddhism as well. It is very surprising to see that even they don't have the word sacred in their languages. They have very similar word which may be translated as a holy, is called Shen Seng. But Shenzhen in Pali, in Chinese and Japanese vocabulary, it symbolizes something like extremely right, highly exalted, doubtless as it must be. So those words, again, you see, in our culture, in our Orient culture, in our Asian culture, it is very obvious that we don't have the word sacred to do with divine power. But our sacred is something that how we transform ourselves. So this is the one thing we have to understand when we talk about encountering the sacred in the Buddhist perspective. The second word, I guess that we need to be clarified about pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is a very ancient tradition which you can find in Buddhism. For example, when King Asoka used the word Dharma Yatra as to travel in the Dharma, to travel for the Dharma, as the word we can use as a pilgrimage. But even earlier to that, if you look at the Mahaparinirvana Sutta, we will find one very word which in these days, a lot of Buddhist community, Buddhist businessmen, especially one who is majestic in tourism, used to refer very much, is that the Buddha's word saying that one should visit 4 holy places. So one can be in heaven by visiting those places. And those places is called Sangvejaniya Sthana, Sangvejaniya Dhana. And the word Sangvejaniya Sthana in Sanskrit or Sangvejaniya Dhana in Pali, I guess would be very similar to the word pilgrimage. But however, pilgrimage from the Western point of view is not that so. Pilgrimage in Western point of view is travel from home to some other places in terms of a divine, in terms of a kind of a respect, in terms of a homage, and then bring something back at your own home. But pilgrimage in Buddhism is called Sangvejaniya Sthana. The word Sangveja is very interesting here. Generally, we say that it is holy places. In fact, Sangvejaniya is the word derivation from the Sang and Vija, which means that self-knowledge. It means that which is kind of giving you an urgent message for you to react upon that. So the urgency of understanding yourself, the urgency understanding how you should behave in the life, that is what you call Sangveja. You become aware, you are educated, you are aware of how you should behave yourself. Sangvidya, knowledge by yourself, knowing by yourself, making urgency of developing yourself. And that is a very word called pilgrimage. So therefore, Buddha says that one should go to any places which can give that urgency message for you to be aware that your life is too short. Your life is controlled by the mental defilements. So how you should behave, how you should have a life of quality. And that is what we call pilgrimage in Buddhism. Having said that, the tourism these modern days is a very result of something called economy burst. These days, with the convenience in transportation, we can see that people are traveling all around. Especially, this is the 3rd year of a COVID pandemic, and looks like the number of COVID is reducing and the world is opening. All the religious pilgrimage sites are opening. The number are flocking everywhere, and then same as in Borobudur. People are coming in flux. However, the authority in Borobudur has taken one step ahead of saying that they are going to limit the visitor within some numbers, about 1,000 or so per day, which means that economic burst is another issue in tourism, but as a whole idea, we need to bring that tourism to a sustainability, to look at the archaeology in a way more sustainable and for the future. I would say that Borobudur is a unique place for Sangveja, for pilgrimage, because if you take India and Nepal, where Buddha was born, where Buddha was lived, all those Buddhas related places, what I would see is that all the ruins, and you have to imagine all the Buddha's life based on the guide which give you a tour. But Borobudur has a different place in terms of pilgrimage, because I would say Borobudur is a Buddhist learning center, World Buddhist Learning Center, from the way it started. Because Borobudur is the place where every individual, not only Buddhists, any human from any culture, from any part of the world who comes and then easily be encountered with the sacred. Because what level, what expectation you go to visit Borobudur, it depends on what is your background. And you will find some of the stories, you will find some of the Jatakas, you will find some of the part of a Lalita Vistara, you will find some of the story from other texts of Buddhism, which is animated, which is cartoonized, which is carved on those stones. And all those stories, if you learn, if you make understanding, and of course, without your expectation, you might encounter the sacred. Because all those stories are reflections of your life. All those stories inspire your life. So, whole idea of how we should develop Borobudur for the future generations, it is very important to think. And this conference is that conference which we have to come together and then think together, and then let's make our next move, not just to preserve Borobudur as an archaeological site, but how to make it a living archaeology, where people can come and encounter the sacred, which will have a great impact upon your life of living. So, encountering the sacred, it is something very important that not only Buddhists, but anyone, all walks of life, regardless of nationality, regardless of religion, if you come there, not to take a photograph, not to take a worship, but to learn how we should live our life, how we should develop our life to be more peaceful and happiness. It is not about religion. It is about how to become a good human being. And those are the story. Instead of reading from the palm leaves, instead of reading from all these ancient texts written with the very difficult languages, but in Borobudur, what you see is that the universal language, it is manifested in the pictures, in those relief, and as a step and step. So therefore, Borobudur, from the derivation, it is the vihara of the Buddhas on a hill. And it is truly representing the name Borobudur itself. Therefore, I just hope that with this conference, we can more become enlightened, not only from the archaeological perspective, add it more to be a living archaeology, add it more to be a Buddhist learning center, which once Sumatra and Java was a Buddhist learning center as a branch or similar to a Nalanda University in India a long way back. So how we can revive that Buddhist center where people from all over the world go there to learn Buddhism, I think Borobudur is the place where you have all teaching tools in front of us so that we can learn about what is the teaching of the Buddha, and we can learn about how to become a good human being, how to become a resourceful person that we can develop our world as well as our life. Therefore, that is what I call encountering the sacred. That is, I call pilgrimage, which I would say that better than what we see in India and all other places. Because in those places you have to imagine, you have to be visionary. But here in Borobudur, you have everything carved in a more easily understanding tools are there. The only way is that how do we use those teaching instruments for better understanding of what we call Buddhism, which is not as a religion, but a teaching which can develop, which can enforce, which can improve our life to be happy and peace. So let Borobudur be a source of happiness and peace for this very world. Thank you.